So that's sort of the initial thoughts and ideas as to where this value comes from. But if you look longer term, the incubators are spaces where some collective expertise and collective wisdom actually gets developed. People can mentor new startup organizations through the hurdles that they initially face. We know that 4 out of 5 companies fail within the first 5 years. A lot of them fail because they're just bad ideas. That happens, that you expect. But a lot of them fail, even though they might be good ideas, because they've made 1 or 2 critical errors in decision on the way. And you had what otherwise would be viable organizations going belly up. Well, the mentorship and the peer support that people can provide each other in incubators is a way of helping to navigate those rough waters and avoid those problems. And in addition, I mentioned earlier that you have someone focused on space and the visuals and the aesthetics. You can also have people providing more tailored services too. So like the Accelerator Center has not just all of these startup organizations, there's also an IRAP representative there. So that's the Industrial Research, anyone know the other two? All right. What? Assistance Program, thank you. Which is a fund that a lot of these startups end up accessing as a way to bridge their move towards expanding. So, next. So a lot of that's been from the perspective of the people who would actually be using the incubators, but not everyone in Waterloo Region would be working out of one of these shared workspaces. So what are the sort of broader implications that we would get of not just having 3 or 4 incubators in the region, but having 3 or 4 dozen incubators in the region? Well, one, broadening the economic base. It's one of the things about having a diverse set of organizations starting up is we aren't entirely reliant on 1 or 2 industries. Second, and coupled with that, the reliance on fewer companies. That in turn, because you know that there's a diversity of talent, also attracts more diverse investment sources too. So we aren't reliant on single pots of money funding all of the economic development that we have locally. Also makes it easier to retain talent. Now, if we think of the long-term economic development strategy for the region and also for the cities, one particular gap that has been noted, being a recent graduate of a local university and a current student of a local university, is how do you actually retain those bright, talented people in the Waterloo region? Well, if this becomes a place that has that reputation, even more so than it does already now, of being where people can go and bring their ideas to fruition, that is really going to add a lot of value in just keeping that talent here instead of letting it drift away to places like Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal or the United States or Europe. These centers could also be just really interesting points of interest. If we're trying to drive people to using, so if we have a light rail line, one of the things you would like to do is have people actually use it. And creating these incubators as points of interest in and of themselves are some of those additional anchors that can be used near those spots to actually bring more people onto the rail system and get them commuting between them. And finally, I mean, part of the reason I talked about the hot desks and the telecommuting is just the possibility of reducing the environmental impact of work in this city. If you reduce the need for people to have to commute, if you reduce the need of people to have to commute during peak times, and if you make it a lot easier for people who would be at home to actually work from home, then you're reducing our reliance on the overall transportation system. Do that effectively, and you can make the economy that's more productive and more environmental at the same time. So, next. So there has already been a little bit of local research on incubation in the region. Civics.ca, there's a local research project that was done to look at the possibility of sort of creating a Center for Social Innovation model here. Through their research, they found that a more viable approach for this city, just because it's not as, or the region, because it's not as centralized, would be to actually have different hubs of incubators around Waterloo, Cambridge, Kitchener. And so I talked a bit already about some of that development of new places, but one of the things that we could actually get from having a cluster of incubators here would be the knowledge on how to create and run incubators. That's not just something that would be valuable locally, but could actually be an export industry in its own right. I already talked about Portland, Oregon. A lot of the local environmental and sustainable development that they have pioneered in that city has now become a major export industry for Portland in terms of being able to sell their expertise in architecture, in design, in planning to other cities around North America. To me, I would love to hear 10 years down the road that people around this continent are turning to Waterloo as a model of local economic development based around the idea of creating these wonderful entrepreneurial spaces. Thanks. So, questions? Again, yep. Oh. Sorry. I think they're trying to replace that.
There's the concept of organizational culture that we could bring to accelerator centers and incubators. I mean, as these diffuse around the world increasingly, they're going to have a tremendous impact. And we want to ensure that our innovation is such that it's for ends that are going to be extremely positive. And there isn't enough emphasis on this. And if there could be a culture within incubators and accelerators that related to that type of thing, I'm sort of getting at directional concepts like values and so on. The University of Waterloo, in the site that says what we're about, says they're about two primary things, innovation and collaboration. But I think that's not good enough. We need to qualify those. It needs to be always at least sustainable innovation, and I would say for collaboration it needs to be a synergistic collaboration. And that means one in which there's much greater benefit for all the participants than there otherwise perhaps might be if more emphasis weren't given.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things that appeals to me about this sort of model of startup development is that there's a space that's created where a natural culture sort of emerges. And one of the advantages you have of this kind of model over, say, just a large office working under a single company is because everyone is sort of, all the collaboration is voluntary. You're not being ordered by a manager or a board of directors to work together on projects that you might not necessarily be interested in. And what that to me does is it actually radically democratizes the workplace that people are working in. Everything is based on that, getting the information out, creating those networks, and building that those synergies. And to me, that's a great starting point for building a culture that is more sustainable and more adaptive, and more creative and human, too. Yep.
Thanks. I wondered if there were good examples that you're aware of incubators where businesses, as well as volunteer organizations or people who don't have any money to pay for, you know, where there's a sort of model where certain organizations that make money are combined with other organizations that don't bring in money at all. Like if there's sort of, you know, collaborative models of volunteer and entrepreneurial organizations.
I'm trying to think of, I'm having a hard time thinking of incubators that are models that include sort of pure volunteer-based organizations. But I know that like the Center for Social Innovation has social enterprise and just some strict not-for-profit organizations, some of which rely more heavily on volunteers than others. And even that, combining those with for-profit companies, is really good in creating a lot of kind of sector dialogue. And I think, I mean, to me that the EcoTrust Center in Portland is kind of the best example of creating that dialogue between sectors. It's such a new space these incubator models, that they're kind of continually every year new sorts of types of collaborations are being identified, figured out, and experimented in different places. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we could make something like that viable here.
Just related.
Last question?
Related to what you were asking. Oh, thanks, Sean. I guess related to what you were asking, Treehouse in Kitchener, which is literally next door to us right here. It's very new. It was started by a couple of people in town. Has some of that component in it as well. So that's something, if it's for you personally or an organization you're involved with, definitely something to look into. And Treehouse is spelled the German way.
All right, so we'll go on. So next slide. I also, you may have noticed, put a couple of Post-it notes on your table. I would just like you to help me as we go through this. If you have ideas on how we could actually help make these incubators more viable in this region through either some foundation, private, not-for-profit, or government sector support, please provide those to me. I'm very interested to see what kind of policy changes we could do to support this stuff locally. All right, so a bit down the road, this to me could be an interesting way of really, again, building some expertise locally, strengthening the linkages we have between sectors. One of the things I love about this region is how easy it is to talk to people from the not-for-profit, the public, and the private sectors, and there's less siloing here than there are in a lot of other places, and I think we can build on that. The integration of workspace and cultural space, creation of more interesting workplaces, reducing environmental impact, and because in addition to the mention of Portland, nothing should go without a Jane Jacobs quote either. New ideas do need old buildings, and it's a wonderful way that we could revitalize some of those historic spaces. So yes, back to that question. Please use this opportunity, because we're going into a break, and have a bit of a discussion. Take some time, take a minute to write down your ideas as to how we could make this stuff happen locally. And I'm looking forward to reading that, hearing back from you, and seeing how we can feed that back into our local leaders, many of whom are sitting at your tables with you. Thank you.